Welcome back to the Sales Revolution. I'm Ingrid Maynard, founder and managing director of The Sales Doctor. I'm joined today by Colin Ellis. Let me tell you a little bit about Colin. Colin Ellis is a 5 times best-selling author, award-winning speaker, and a workplace culture expert who helps organisations around the world to create vibrant places to work. Originally from Liverpool in the UK, Colin actually spent 17 years in Australia and New Zealand before he was dragged back to the UK, he says, kicking and screaming. And he's glad to have proper football back, but he does miss the coffee. Welcome today, Colin.
Thank you, Ingrid.
Fantastic. Well, I'm a little bit fascinated about your journey, given how you speak with such passion and humour to get razor sharp cut through with your audiences. Tell us a little bit about the little boy who preferred wearing a shirt and tie, and how did he find his way to where you are today?
Yeah, I think I've been fighting against my upbringing, which I say with a lot of humour. I didn't have a bad upbringing, but it was one where, especially in Liverpool back in those days, you were either going to be a footballer, a musician, or you had a trade. You were a carpenter, you're an electrician. My dad was a product of the working class, and that's what he always wanted. A safe, secure job. That was his thing. And I failed all of my exams at school, pretty much, Ingrid. So and it was back in the day when you could just get a job. Which was really fortunate. You just write and get jobs because they needed people. And I got a job in a bank. And what I found when I started work, I had this real desire, which I'd never had at school. The school was a bit too formulaic for my personality, I think, on reflection. I had this real desire to improve myself, but I found that I really flourished as part of a team. And looking back, it wasn't like I had any major light bulb moment, Ingrid, but kind of on reflection, that's what I really flourished as part of a team. And I really wanted to understand how to not only maintain that sense of authenticity, as we would call it now, that sense of self. I had confidence, I used humour, but also I was really committed to my job and my work. I wanted to do a really good job. How do you do that whilst also both creating and being part of a team? So, my journey over the last, 40 years, and I still have this relentless curiosity about how do we improve self, how do we improve teams. I think that's really been the foundation for who I am.
Yeah, well, it definitely comes through, from your website to your writing. It was great to read. And that's the reason I reached out to you originally, because of that LinkedIn article about baby boomers, citing research from Brave Stars, which is an agency in the UK that specialises in midlife career transitions. Now, their report, which is The Untapped Workforce, Why Employers Can't Afford to Ignore Age Anymore, found that only 13% of organisations say that age is a top DEI priority over the next 5 years, and that less than a third offer retirement planning support, with even fewer offering benefits specifically tailored to older workers, despite the fact that older workers contribute over, this is UK stats, so £600 billion to the economy. So I wanted to ask you today, why has age been left out of the DEI conversation?
Yeah, and what I wrote about and what I found, Ingrid, that it's the very last consideration. And I think partly it's historical. I'm not accusing organisations of deliberately putting it there. I think there used to be a narrative where you got to 55, or you certainly got to 50, and you were on the finishing stretch. It was time to pack up and move to your bach or your beach house or, the country or wherever it was. And that's not the case now. We're working longer because we have to, because, the cost of living has dramatically increased. And actually, I think, people don't have that mindset anymore of, oh, I'm done, I'm finished, I'm on the finishing stretch. You know, my last permanent job in Australia, I had a performance manager guy who was just his performance was awful, and he would just say, it's my last 3 years, and I'm like, you don't get to coast for your last 3 years. It's my job to make sure that not only are you the best of yourself, but actually you leave a legacy. And so I think it's been at the bottom because historically the expectation was you would just get to a certain age and you would look for a way out, and that's not the case anymore.
No, it really isn't the case. I mean,
Yeah, it really
you're
is.
right in saying, that, God, we have to keep working longer. But, and I know that article was predominantly focused on retirement planning, but actually companies can really tap into this generation's strengths in order to reinforce the rest of its workforce's skill set. How can it do that a little bit better?
Well, I cited some examples. I think Aviva had a midlife MOT to really help people think about their careers, not just their retirement plans. I mentioned that the guy that I performance managed. I talked a lot about legacy. What kind of footprint do you want to leave on the world? B&Q, which is kind of Bunnings equivalent. So B&Q is the Bunnings equivalent here in the UK. They have fantastic programs, and if you walk into any of their stores, it's all people over the age of 50 who, they have a program specifically designed for over 50s to help them maintain that sense of youth, vitality, with kind of relation to their careers. So I think it's that classic thing, and when it comes to DEI, we say to look at the human and find the human in front of you. Don't look at the gender, race, age. And I think age, especially the people, I'm 56 this year. I feel like I've got so much left to give. I feel like I'm just getting started, if I'm honest. I think I wrote that in the article. And I think this should be really embraced by organisations to ensure that they've not just got people on the landing strip out of the organisation and are actually part of the terminus looking to add value to everyone in there.
Yeah, well, that's exactly right. I mean, when we contrast, say, baby boomers, maybe even Gen X against Gen Z, I mean, one of the things that you also talked about was the need for companies to train soft skills, with Gen Z in particular. How's this showing up at work? And what's the impact of them not coming ready-made with some of the soft skills that, maybe in years gone by, we've come to expect with other generations?
So the management skill set is the biggest challenge that every organisation faces, Ingrid, and the biggest opportunity, because middle managers are the difference when it comes to culture. They're the people that are actively living, breathing culture every day. With respect to senior leaders, they're role modelling the culture. We don't really get to see them every day, whereas middle managers, these are the people. And what makes the difference is the soft skills. We call them traditionally soft skills, but these are the humanistic skills that they have. Now, the challenge here is for Gen X leaders, for baby boomers, our responsibility was to pick them up from our peers. That we had to literally, and I used to keep a book. I used to keep a little notebook where I would write down what I liked in other leaders and what I didn't like, and so things to do, things not to repeat, these kinds of things. But traditionally, That's been the model, Ingrid, is you learn on the job, and we've talked about this for years. Now we're bringing our children up differently. I've got 2 Gen Z kids. My son's just come in, he works night shifts, stacking shelves at Tesco's, the right way to learn, moaning about his managers, and he's moaning about the lack of soft skills. Because his expectation, he's had a completely different upbringing to mine. We taught them empathy. We taught them vulnerability. They talked about resilience at school. We've had courageous conversations with them. We've treated them like adults almost since they were 11. And they're getting into work. They're being managed by Gen X and millennial leaders who just don't have the skills to, as I say, manage other people's children. So that we've got this massive expectation gap. Is we have Gen Zs and maybe younger millennials who've been brought up to expect better from their managers, and they get in the workplace and managers, and I don't blame managers because organizations haven't got these programs to upskill managers in the way that with the skills that they actually need to get the best out of people. And so we've got this expectation gap when it comes to management skill set.
So, okay, so let's just say, I'm a senior leader and I've recognised that there is that expectation gap. And I love how you say it's an expectation gap, and then there's probably some skill and behavioural gaps that kind of underlie that. Let's just say I've recognised that. What are some of the things that I could be doing to maybe cross-fertilise, all of the different skills or strengths that, maybe 5 generations we now have in the workforce? How can I kind of scaffold, maybe even a matrix around closing some of those expectation gaps, but also reinforcing the strengths that every generation has inherent to it, it coming into the workforce?
So there's a few things, Ingrid. Firstly, I would encourage peer-to-peer learning. One of the things that I've done with a couple of organisations that I've worked with is kind of reverse mentoring. So for people who are slightly older, so maybe late 40s, early 50s, is pair them with somebody who's Gen Z. And I made the point in the article is, don't be quick to get rid of kind of our generation, because we've made all the mistakes that you haven't yet made. So reverse mentoring is a way of sharing this knowledge, sharing these mistakes, but don't put too much structure around it. Don't make it too formal. Actually, we learn more from informal conversations than often we do from formal structures. So keep it light, keep it humorous. I often think if you can find those small moments of laughter, there's a lot of learning to be had in there. So that's one idea. Secondly, I've kind of regular, small, bite-sized learning sessions for everybody, but encourage people to share. Encourage people to share what they've learned over their career, even if they've been there, it doesn't matter whether you've been there 5 years or 50 years. Encourage people to share what they've learned. I think, for sales particularly, I worked with a sales organisation recently, just don't confuse technical expertise, so being a great salesperson, with management expertise. There are some people that shouldn't be managers. And often we promote people based on length of tenure. It's 10 years. Colin's been here 10 years. It's his turn next, or technical expertise. Promote people into management positions who inherently have those humanistic skills, or are dedicated to improving who they are. And so that's another thing that they can think about. But reverse mentoring for me is a really great and fun way to not only break down barriers between generations, but ensure that learning that we picked up throughout the years isn't forgotten.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, it provides that stretch for people, early on in their careers as well, when they're developing other people. You talk about the reverse mentoring, but for somebody that might be starting out in their career to be mentoring somebody who's, quite advanced in their career in terms of experience and tenure, that's a fantastic opportunity for them to really ratchet up their own development as well.
I think as well, Ingrid, and it's a point that I often make, is for people kind of my age, still in the workforce, we have a responsibility not to use stories as an anchor to the past. We have kind of this opportunity to use stories as, wind behind the sails for the future. But also there's a point to be made here about continued relevance. What we can't afford to do is say, oh, I wish it was still the same as it used to be. I hear a lot of, oh, you just can't say anything these days. Well, you really can. And actually, if you spoke to someone younger than you, and it's not about learning a completely new language, I don't want people shortening words and going, oh yeah, it's totes, obs, and all this kind of stuff, and doing something that's outside of your generation. But there's so much to be learned. My kids talk at me, kind of 8 hours a day some days. And there's so much knowledge for me in there. And it's just finding that little nugget in between the gossip about,
Yes.
kind of film stars and stuff, is like, what's the learning for me generationally that I can take about attitudes?
So I think one of the things you mentioned before was about, a continuous desire or an appetite for, that self-improvement, self-development, the growth. Is it also about being curious and genuinely curious? Is it about being interested in other people as well?
It 100% is, Ingrid. But I think what organisations haven't yet cottoned onto, which I feel like I'm beating this drum every day, is they're making it too difficult to do this stuff. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't stop using the word curiosity, but for people of my age, being curious isn't something that we're familiar with. And so we have to use language that is familiar to the generation when we talk about it. So I always say to people my age, and I addressed a group not so long ago of older engineers, I'm like, don't be thinking you're the smartest person in the room. Have a growth mindset. Mindset is another new word for our generation. Is be open to what's new, be open to what's different. That's the kind of language that we use. I made the point recently, an organization that I worked with, they said, we did this program and it didn't really work. I was like, what was it? It's like, it was a radical candor program. I'm like, listen, I've read the book. It's really good. Yeah. The book's really good. But don't call the program that. Call it something that they use, and this was a group of scientists. Like, yes, they're interested in the research behind it, but don't call it radical candor. They're like, they'll deconstruct the words. Call it something. Call it a word that they use. So I guess the short answer is yes. It's about being curious. But when we're talking to the different generations, it's really about thinking what's the best way to communicate this that generates the desire to learn. And sometimes that's not calling something what it looks like out of the box. It's finding the right words for the people who are in front of you.
Yeah. I mean, relevance is everything, isn't it? I mean,
100%.
As soon as someone... Yeah, I mean, if it's relevant, then, people will find inherent value in it. Now... You're the author of, 5 best-selling books on culture and have recently released Detox Your Culture. What made you write this book, Colin, and what are the hallmarks of a toxic culture?
So why did I write it? I was sick of reading it sounds very Liverpudlian. I'm sick of reading about it in the paper, Ingrid. But I was sick of reading about the fact that, having written Culture Fix in 2019, where I really laid out the things that great organisation cultures did, I'm like, I'll write the handbook here. People can read it, they'll be able to build their own culture, and yet the number of toxic cultures in the media, there's like one a week at the minute. And so I got tired of writing about it. And so reading about it. So what I wanted to do was to bring some of those stories to the fore, say, look, here's a case study, and here's what you can learn to make sure that you never ever find yourself in that position. I read some horrific stats, 1 in 4 people dreads going to work. People with high levels of stress were 22 times more likely to have suicidal thoughts. But also there's for if that's not enough for leaders, it's actually, when you actually train your middle managers on how to build safe, respectful cultures, then you're 2.5 more times more likely to be productive, to keep your staff, all of these kinds of things. And so that was my compulsion for writing the book. And, my goal is that organizations or leaders or managers read it and go, okay, well, here's something that we can do that's relatively small. We can do it right now. And that will dramatically reduce the risk of us ever finding ourselves in the media and destroying the life of a human being.
Yeah, that was a terrifying statistic that you mentioned before, and like you said, if that wasn't enough, but clearly it's not, and so people need to detox their culture. What would you say is the first step to a cultural detox?
Well, I think you have to have leadership buy-in. There's always, for me, there's 3 steps. There has to be leadership buy-in. You don't need everybody, but you need the majority of people. Leaders who understand the value in investing in culture, and why that's important is because then when you do the second step, which is making sure that managers have got the skills to actually build, because managers don't have the skills to build vibrant, non-toxic cultures. They just don't. We don't teach them this stuff. So when you're buying for leaders, they understand that managers have to take time away from their job to learn how to build cultures, and then leaders have to hold their own managers to account when they're not doing the things that they should. And then the third step is introducing a common language to make it easy for people to talk about culture, because people don't know how to talk about it, Ingrid. You know, in Culture Fix, I introduced this model where I talked about stagnant, pleasant, combatant, vibrant cultures. And when you introduce that language into the organization, all of a sudden people can say, oh, it feels quite pleasant at the minute. What do we need to do to get it back to vibrant? Oh, it feels really combatant at the minute. How do we make sure that we're more emotionally intelligent? And so when people can talk about it, they can start to generate the action required to ensure that the culture remains vibrant. But it always starts with leaders valuing culture in the first place.
Yeah, absolutely. Can I ask you a question, though? Is it... Of course they need to have buy-in, but do they... Because they're part of the creators of that culture. I'm not saying that they're the only creators of the culture, but by the very definition and nature of their roles, leaders are inherent to leading that culture. Is it ever possible for them to know how to get themselves out of the culture that they're in? Because they might recognise, for example, that things aren't great here and we need to do something. But it's very difficult for people that have been part of the reason that it is the way that it is to be able to change it. So at what point do you find that people bring someone like you in where they go, we need help here, Colin, like something's not right, and we need to do something about it, but, we're too close to it, or we're in it, we can't see everything, and we don't know the pathway out?
So it's usually at that point. I think what and certainly, kind of anecdotally, when people bring me in, either I'll work with an organization who has a really good culture and they don't want to lose it. And so I'll do something regularly for organizations, like pumping up their tires on a bike. That's with leaders basically saying, listen, we just need someone to help us to maintain this. But the situation that you're talking about is usually what will happen is that leaders will do an engagement survey. They'll get a score of maybe, I don't know, between 50 and 75%, something along those lines. And really a vibrant culture, 75% and above is what you're looking at. And they'll say, we don't know how to get it to the next level. We've tried everything, and usually they've only tried the things that historically they've always done. So they'll have a new leadership development program where a special few people will go. They'll have an Excel spreadsheet where we'll have a load of actions based on the comments that people provide, and they'll feel like they've done those actions, and yet the score has gone backwards, which was the case of one organisation that I worked with, and they said, what are we not seeing? And you're right, everybody has a responsibility for culture, everybody. And often that's where my messaging starts. And so the leadership team will get me to do some kind of presentation to the organization. And I'm different from a consulting model, is I teach people how to do it themselves. My wife calls it a self-limiting consulting model because I don't get lots of repeat work. But as someone who bought consultants in the past, just tell me how to do it so I can do it myself. And so often it's when they get the same engagement score year after year or every 6 months, and they're like, we just don't know how to get ourselves out of the rut. And of course, the way to get out of the rut is to teach your managers how to build culture so that they assume responsibility for it and feel a sense of belonging to it. And also introduce accountability to make sure that you're holding yourself to a new standard that you can then maintain. Last week I was in Cambridge in the UK. I've been working with a team for about 12 months. They were in exactly that new position. They appointed a new leader. She found out about me and she said, can you come in and help us? And they went from being 25% behind in sales to being 50% over target. The figures were released last week, and that's testament to the work that they have done to rebuild their culture, but testament to the leadership team for actually saying, we're not sure what we're doing here, can we have some help?
Yeah, that is testament to the leadership team saying that and recognising that, and then having the appetite to change. I mean, there's a couple of things I want to just dive into here briefly. the first thing was that you mentioned a team, and I'm often curious about how an organisation itself, for the most part, can have a really great culture, but there might be, one team within that organisation where the culture's really stinks, for want of a better word, and it's, the people within that team kind of look outside of that team and think, oh, I wish I was in that team, or I wish I was over there. How come we've got this stinky culture in our particular team, and its impact on outcomes? How do you kind of work with a leader like that, where the rest of the organisation's okay? Or am I kind of making that up, that it's usually not the rest of the organisation that's okay and it's just one team? What's been your experience around that?
Again, it comes back to the understanding of how culture is built, Ingrid. So great cultures are made up of great subcultures. So there's no, often I'll see we have a one-team culture, and immediately I'm like, no, you don't. What you have is a myriad of teams upholding the values in a different way, because, values, vision, purpose, this is the backbone of your culture. But it's up to managers to really define their own subculture. So when you have a really stinky culture, to use your language, and I know exactly what you mean, is usually the manager there isn't doing enough to either build or grow or evolve the culture. Now, often people are like, oh, it's usually a really bad manager. Sometimes they're not. Sometimes they're just a really good human being. But what they're striving for is harmony. And you can't keep everybody happy in a harmonious culture. So what happens in that situation is everybody becomes unhappy. And I'll be honest with you, I was lucky in the sense that I was born with a set of good team building skills, and I knew if I could create a formula of how to do it, I could replicate it in all my jobs. And so I used to be that manager who used to vacuum up great people from other teams because they were like, oh, your team seems really good. How do we join? So when people understand that great culture is made up of great subcultures, they recognize that in order to fix one subculture, you have to really get under the skin of, well, what is it that's turning it bad? And so when I work with a manager in that instance I just gave you there, that sales team, it wasn't that the manager was a bad person. They just did nothing to build an actual team. So you ended up with all of these mini silos within this one team. And actually, when we connected everybody and said, listen, how are we as one team going to achieve, one team as in within the small subculture, going to contribute to the organization's goal? You create this sense of togetherness and belonging. And actually, people then get behind what the manager is trying to do. And notwithstanding the odd, stumble every now and again, there's a real great commitment to wanting to improve things for each other.
So let's talk about that sales team, because I'm, obviously with my focus, that's a huge area there. What how you said, okay, we need to all come together as a team and and really focus on how together we're going to focus on delivering the company's goals, and then unifying that team. Tell me about where they were. What were some of the things that you did to help them to turn that around? And how you said about, that transformation in terms of output. What some of the leading indicators towards achieving those results actually were? What were some of the behaviours that you saw change in order to get those results?
All right, you might have to remind me about some of the points of that question. But let me start with the outputs, because that's always where I start, always.
Yeah, okay.
I always say to the manager, what does it look like in 6, 9, 12 months' time? And usually from the engagement score, I can tell pretty much how long it will take to do something, right? And so employee happiness is always, engagement score is still the best way to measure culture. Adam Grant found this about 5 years ago. He did some research. He's like, listen, it's still the best indicator. But of course, employee happiness, attrition of good people, how often are we losing those good people? We don't want to do that. For this particular team, it was sales. Were they hitting their target? How much were they above or below their target? And new customers. So that's where I always start. So I say, what does it look like? And for this particular team, because the score was, I think it was 48%, I said, listen, it's going to take between 9 and 12 months to get us to where we want to be. And that was the point then I made to the leadership team. So the manager then put me in front of the leadership. Well, I said I had to speak to the leadership team, and I said, "Listen, are you up for this?" And of course, everyone around the table, 100% were up for this. I'm like, but you really have to be up for it, because I'm actually what I require of you is self-reflection, togetherness, and behaviour change. Because let's face it, if you all had the skills, you would be there now. And I said, I'm not blaming you for not having the skills. No one's ever taught you how to do this before. And so then I spent half a day with the leadership team, educating them on what culture is, how it's built, to help them understand their role in role modeling the culture that is expected of all employees, right? So it's about half a day. And by the end of that half a day, they were then really excited about I then spent 2 days with the entire team. It was about 45 people. And of course, it's a massive undertaking, Ingrid, taking 45 people. I wanted a workshop to 330 people, if you can believe that, in a basketball hall. It's brilliant. And actually that team got the quickest change I've ever seen in any team. Their engagement score improved 30% in 3 months. But anyway, that's another
that's
story.
Wow.
I then spent, kind of 2 days with this team. We talked about, again, educated them on culture. Then we did a piece on self-awareness, because self-aware individuals are the building blocks of great team. And this is where you can use a personality survey or something like that to help. But it's only it's a helpful guide. It's not a black and white, and I have to talk about neurodivergence and the fact that it's not always black and white. And actually it's the conversation that's important, not the report, all these kinds of things. And then we talked about the 6 pillars, right? So the 6 pillars of workplace culture are purpose and vision. So what does the organization stand for? What's its aspiration? Because we need to bake that into the team, same with its values. So these are the things inherent in every team. And then they're the first 2. And then personality and communication is pillar 3. Behavior is pillar 4. Collaboration is pillar 5, and innovation is pillar 6. So the whole 2 days is structured around all of the components that make teams and organizations successful. And at the end of the 2 days, what you've got is an agreement from the team on the behaviors they need to demonstrate towards each other in order to achieve the targets that they've got. And in this particular case, it was a sales target, right? So we're talking very, very specifically about here's what we, not the leaders, here's what we as a team need to do. And they expect the leaders to role model that. Then we talked about collaboration. Here's how we will work together. And I know it sounds really basic, but again, no one does it. Here's how we are going to work together to make sure that we don't lose sight of the goals that we've got. This is how we'll use Microsoft Teams. This is how we'll use email. This is how we'll structure our meetings. Really basic stuff that, again, nobody ever does. And then, I do a fun exercise. I mean, it's fun all the way through because there's lots of energy. I use music. I use humor. I don't want people to see culture as boring, because it's not. The way that we work is, fundamental to everything in our lives. And then at the end is a fun exercise to get people to come up with new ideas. And the point of that exercise is to show them that culture is perpetual. It never stands still. You already have the ideas about how to keep it great. And then it's about creating a plan to put everything into action. And at the end of 2 days, people are not only dedicated to improving their culture, but they also have a renewed sense of self and a togetherness that they've never had as a team before, because they've done something in 2 days that no one has done before, because they've actually defined what it means to have a vibrant culture that's theirs, that they own.
I want to come to one of your programs, Colin. I mean, just listening to you, they sound not only very high energy and lots of fun, which is part of learning, but they all sound incredibly practical, and you're truly facilitating them to create something that there's a high degree of ownership over, because they've created it and they've committed to it, and then they're more likely to implement that. So I find that's really motivating for me to hear. When are you back in Australia?
I am back in the middle of August. I am speaking at the Australian HR Institute's conference, which I'm really, really excited about. So I'm doing an hour's keynote, and then what am I doing? Doing a panel. And then what I like to do when I speak at conferences, Ingrid, is I'll just go around and speak to as many people as I can, answer as many questions, because I think that practicality is really important. I think often what we do, and listen, as a former senior manager myself, I was a little bit guilty of this, is we like to do the latest thing rather than focus on what are the practical things that people need right now. And so anything that I can share, I think, is always valued.
And how else can people find you, Colin?
So they can find me on LinkedIn. So I show up there quite a lot, Ingrid. I write a daily blog, and, I've always believed in little and often when it comes to learning. So you can go to colindellis.com and sign up for the blog there. And also there's a bunch of free stuff on there for people who just want to educate themselves, who don't have the budget and want to have a crack themselves. And of course, they can get all my books on Amazon.
Fantastic. Well, today has been one of my most favourite conversations. I've loved every skerrick of it, and I just wish that we had longer, but maybe it's time for another conversation down the track.
Sounds great, Ingrid. Thanks for having me on.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you, Colin. Okay, you've been listening to The Sales Revolution. I'm Ingrid Maynard. And to find out how the Sales Doctor can help your organisation to transform its revenue, growth and profit, visit us on our website at www.thesalesdoctor.com.au. I look forward to your company next episode. Bye for now.